You are now listening to Mark's Unexplained World by Mark the Medium, available on YouTube, Spotify, Amazon Prime, Podbean, and most other podcast platforms. Tonight's episode is about the disappearance of Brian Shaffer. So it's over to you now, Mark, for this week's thrilling tale.
Brian Randall Shaffer, who was a medical student at the Ohio State University College of Medicine, has been missing since the early hours of the 1st of April 2006 after security cameras recorded him just outside a bar in Columbus. Earlier that evening, on the 31st of March, he had gone out with some friends to celebrate the beginning of spring break. However, later on that same night, he gets separated from them, and his friends all assume he'd gone home early. Brian Shaffer's disappearance has been especially puzzling to investigators since there was no other public access, entrance or exit to the Colombian bar they visited at the time, although there was a service exit near where he was last seen. The Columbus Police Department do have several theories about what may have happened to Brian Shaffer, with some interest and suspicion specifically being directed towards one of his friends. However, this friend has so far refused to take any polygraph tests regarding Brian Shaffer's disappearance. While foul play has been suspected, including the possible involvement of the purported smiley-face serial killer, it has also been speculated that he might be alive and well, living somewhere else under a new identity, sounding suspiciously like what we call the Reggie Perrin syndrome. But whatever the theories might be, Brian Shaffer has never been seen or heard from since. Greetings, Unexplainers. Thank you for tuning in once again and listening to this without a trace episode of Mark's Unexplained World. My name is Mark Hughes. I'm a psychic medium, a ufologist, and a true crime buff. And just to give you a better idea of who I am and what I do, every Monday night, with very few exceptions, I do a podcast on the various subjects under the Unexplained banner. These include ufology, hauntings, disasters, and all different sorts of paranormal phenomena, including true crime, unsolved crime, and missing people. So if you are listening to this show on YouTube, please give us a review and a thumbs up, and subscribe to my channel. And if you are listening on any other podcast platforms, again, give us a like and a follow. In this episode, I'm going to tell you about the strange story surrounding the disappearance of Brian Shaffer. And this week's necessary disclaimer. Well, as the title of the show suggests, this story is a tale of an unsolved disappearance, so may prove upsetting to some. You listen at your own discretion, as always, and all opinions and comments are strictly my own, but the facts of the case still remain. I also apologise if I pronounce anything incorrectly. My English, although it is my first and only language, it does tend to vanish up its own thesaurus or dictionary at times. So, if you find it, please email it to me on ican'tpronounce-strange-words.com. I thank you in advance. Anyway, let us get back to this perplexing and unsolved case. Brian Shaffer, who was aged just 27 years old when he disappeared, grew up in Pickerington in Ohio, which is a suburb just outside of Columbus. He was the eldest of two sons born to his parents, Randy and Renee Shaffer. Graduating from a local high school in 1997, he then went straight to Ohio State University for his undergraduate work, and then 6 years later, Brian Shaffer graduated with a degree in microbiology. Following that, Brian Shaffer then began his studies at the Ohio State University College of Medicine back in 2004. Sadly, during his second year of studies in the March of 2006, his mother died of myelodysplasia, and although Brian Shaffer's friends said that at the time he appeared to be handling the loss of his mother well, her death was still very hard for him to deal with. On an interesting side note, myelodysplasia is a myelodysplastic syndrome, or MDS, which is one of a group of cancers in which immature blood cells in the bone marrow do not mature and as a result do not develop into healthy blood cells. Early on symptoms of myelodysplasia are rarely seen, but later symptoms may include fatigue, shortness of breath, bleeding disorders, anemia or frequent infections, with some types of myelodysplasia developing into an acute myeloid leukemia. Whilst at Ohio State University College of Medicine in 2004, Brian Shaffer had become romantically involved with another medical student called Alexis Wagoner. Alexis Wagoner, along with both of their families and all of their friends of course, believed that Brian Shaffer would probably be proposing marriage to her later in 2006, with the engagement most likely happening on a trip to Miami that the couple had planned for spring break at the beginning of April that same year. Brian Shaffer was a huge fan of tropical locations such as Miami. The relaxed atmosphere and lifestyle appealed to his good nature and personality. And although he told his friends that his decision to pursue a medical career was a serious decision, his real ambition was to start a band playing music in the vein of Jimmy Buffett. On an interesting side note, James William Buffett was an American singer-songwriter who passed away on the 1st of September 2023 at the tender age of 76. He was known for his tropical rock sound and persona, which often portrayed a lifestyle described as island escapism and promoted enjoying life and following passions. Of the 30 albums released by Jimmy Buffett, 8 are certified gold and 9 are certified platinum or multi-platinum by the Recording Industry Association of America, or the RIAA for short. In total, Jimmy Buffett sold over 20 million certified records worldwide, placing him amongst one of the world's best-selling music artists. So, on the Friday of the 31st of March 2006, the classes at the Ohio State University College ended for the annual spring break. Brian Shaffer and his father, Randy Shaffer, decided to celebrate the occasion by having a steak dinner earlier that evening. One thing that Brian Shaffer's father noted about his son was that he seemed exhausted from having pulled all-nighters earlier in the week, cramming as much studying as he could before the critical upcoming exams. His father did not think it was a clever idea that his son, Brian, should go out with a friend called William Florence, or sometimes known as Clint, later that night, as he had previously planned to do so. However, not wanting to put a dampener on the celebrations for his son, his father did not express his reservations. Later that same evening, at around 9 p.m, Brian Shaffer then met his friend William Florence at the bar in the South Campus Gateway complex, located on the High Street in Columbus, called the Ugly Tuna Saloona. Then about hour later, Brian Shaffer called up his girlfriend, Alexis Wagoner, who had returned to her parents' home in Toledo to visit with her family before she and Brian Shaffer were due to depart for their spring break in Miami. After Brian Shaffer had spoken to his girlfriend, he and his friend William Florence then went bar hopping. I think the English term for it is called pub crawling, but whatever rocks your boat, I suppose. And during this bar hopping, the two friends visited several other establishments and venues, drinking and working their way down through the arena district. And according to William Florence, at each stop, the two had one shot each of hard liquor. After this first short break, in part 2, we will look at the further story surrounding Brian Shaffer's disappearance and the beginning of the investigation.
This show is brought to you courtesy of Neil Packer and the Haunted Antiques Paranormal Research Centre. Find them online at www.hauntedresearchcentre.com or at 9 to 11 Regent Street, Hinckley, LE10 1AW. Open on Saturdays from 10 a.m. to 4 p.m. for guided tours of the haunted rooms at just £3 per person. Booking is essential at all times, and over 16s only, please, unless accompanied by an adult. The haunted rooms are extremely haunted, and paranormal activity could and has taken place at any time. Some areas and particular objects or items can be quite scary and unnerving. Membership is available for £25 to qualify for selective offers. And why not download the app, available on both iOS and Android, for only $3.99, to keep up to date with what is coming up at the centre.
Thanks for listening to Mark's Unexplained World. If you are interested in parapsychology, quantum sciences, and true encounters with the other side, you may wish to visit the Weird Walk Home. That's my show on YouTube. Also, stay tuned, because After Dark with Tilly and Mark is creeping your way in June. Additionally, if you are interested in weird sciences, you may like to purchase my brand new book on Amazon. That would be Weird Time by Tim R. Swartz. It features lots of strange explanations and encounters with time from myself and other notable names like Lon Strickler and more. Thanks for listening.
After midnight on the 1st of April 2006, Brian Shaffer and William Florence met another friend named Meredith Reed in a different neighbourhood in Columbus called the Short North. Meredith Reed then gave both Brian Shaffer and William Florence a ride back to the Ugly Tuna Saloona at the South Campus Gateway complex, where they had originally started the night, and he joined them for a final round of drinks. After a time and more drinking, Brian Shaffer then left his two companions, William Florence and Meredith Reed, while they were enjoying the atmosphere of the Ugly Tuna Saloona. He was last seen on a security camera outside the Ugly Tuna Saloon bar just before 2 a.m. Noticing that their fellow drinking companion had been gone a while, both William Florence and Meredith Reed attempted to find Brian Shaffer by repeatedly calling out his name, and then, after a time, when the bar closed at 2 a.m, they left with the other patrons and waited outside in the hope that Brian Shaffer would soon turn up. When the two friends could see that their comrade, Brian Shaffer, was not amongst the departing crowd, they assumed that he had returned to his apartment without letting them know. Later that same weekend, Brian Shaffer's girlfriend, Alexis Wagner, and his father, Randy Shaffer, tried calling him on his phone, but he did not answer. And to cap it all, on the Monday morning, Brian Shaffer also missed the flight to Miami that he and his girlfriend had scheduled to take long before for their spring break. So Brian Shaffer was then reported missing to the Columbus police. It was at this time that the Columbus police began their search for Brian Shaffer. The first place they went to was the Ugly Tuna Saloon bar at the South Campus Gateway, where he was last seen. And since the area around the South Campus Gateway was somewhat a blighted area with a high crime rate, the Gateway building, which housed the bar and several other businesses, had a large number of security cameras. The police then reviewed the footage from all the relevant cameras and found one which showed Brian Shaffer, along with his friends William Florence and Meredith Reed, going up an escalator to the Ugly Tuna Saloon bar's main entrance at 1:15 a.m. And at around 1:55 a.m, Brian Shaffer was then seen on the camera outside the Ugly Tuna Saloon bar, talking briefly with two young women and then saying goodbye before moving off camera. And as none of the cameras had any footage of him leaving the bar shortly afterwards when the Ugly Tuna Saloon closed, this was the last known time that Brian Shaffer was ever seen. The Columbus police had a variety of theories regarding how Brian Shaffer may have been able to dodge the cameras that evening, if, of course, that is what he intended to do. Was it possible that Brian Shaffer could have changed his clothes in the bar or put on a hat and kept his head down in order to hide his face from the cameras? Or could he have left the Ugly Tuna Saloon building via another route? The service door to the Ugly Tuna Saloon, which was not generally used by the public, was just a short distance from where Brian Shaffer was last seen. The service door exit itself did lead to a first-floor hallway which featured at the time an access to a construction area with its own exterior exit. However, some officers believed that this would have been a difficult area to walk through whilst sober, much less when one is intoxicated, as it was presumed Brian Shaffer was more than likely to be at the time. It is possible that the cameras in the area that night may have missed Brian Shaffer leaving the building, as one camera was said to just constantly pan across the area, and the other camera was operated manually. The Columbus police's next step was to look at any footage from the other bars in the area, to see if any cameras there could explain how Brian Shaffer had left the Ugly Tuna Saloon bar unseen. However, any footage from the cameras at the three other nearby bars again showed no trace of him whatsoever. After the Columbus police had completed their hunt for Brian Shaffer on all the camera footage and come up with no leads, they began to fan out from the Ugly Tuna Saloona and widen the search even further. Police officers, who were sometimes accompanied by dogs, started looking in the actual streets themselves, inspecting dumpsters and various other waste containers, and even asking some of the local residents to see if they themselves had seen Brian Shaffer at all. Flyers were distributed and posted widely, bearing his picture showing a tattoo on his upper right arm of a male stick figure logo, and noting a distinctive fleck in colour in one of his irises. The Columbus police even persuaded the city of Columbus itself to let them get into the sewer system and conduct a search for him there. But despite all this action from both the police and the local authorities, no useful information was ever recovered, and Brian Shaffer's whereabouts remained unknown. However, at Brian Shaffer's apartment on Kings Avenue, just 6 blocks away from the Ugly Tuna Saloona bar, his car was still parked outside, and from the inside of the automobile, nothing appeared to be amiss. The people who had seen Brian Shaffer that evening, including his father, Randy Shaffer, were all asked to take a lie detector test, or otherwise known as a polygraph test. Both his father, Randy Shaffer, and Meredith Reed passed the polygraph test, as did all the other people from that evening. William Florence, however, refused point blank to take part, which, to be honest, in my opinion, does seem a bit strange. And the 2 women that Brian Shaffer had last been seen talking to on the camera footage, who were identified later on, claimed in a 2009 interview that neither of them had ever been asked to take a polygraph test. On an interesting side note, a polygraph or lie detector is a device or procedure that measures and records several psychological indicators such as blood pressure, pulse, respiration, and skin conductivity while a person is asked and answers a series of questions. The belief underpinning the use of the polygraph is that deceptive answers will produce psychological responses that can be differentiated from those associated with non-deceptive answers. In other words, it knows if you're telling porkies. Brian Shaffer's girlfriend, Alexis Waggoner, called his phone every evening before going to bed for a long time after his disappearance. According to Alexis Waggoner, it usually went straight to voicemail. But one night in September, it rang 3 times. She said, and I quote,
"I kept calling it to hear it purely because it was one of the best sounds I've ever heard, even if no one picked up."
The Columbus police received many tips. However, none of these tips resulted in any breakthrough regarding Brian Shaffer's disappearance. Later that year in Cincinnati at a Pearl Jam concert, which was Brian Shaffer's favourite band, the lead singer, Eddie Vedder, took the time between songs to ask for tips on Brian Shaffer's disappearance, but unfortunately, none were proven to be especially useful. Randy Shaffer, Brian Shaffer's father, had sadly recently suffered the death of his wife, Renee Shaffer, and so continued the search for his son on his own. He even went as far as to see a psychic medium who told him that his son's body was in the water near a bridge pier. So he and Derek Shaffer, who was Brian Shaffer's younger brother, along with some other citizens who had become interested in the case, brought themselves waders and other varying types of waterproof equipment and spent much of their free time along the shores of the Olentangy River searching in vain for Brian Shaffer's body near any bridges. Just a quick side note here, the Olentangy River is a river which flows through Columbus, adjacent to the Ohio State University campus. The possibility that Brian Shaffer's body was in the Olentangy River also led police to briefly consider that he may be the victim of the heavily disputed smiley-faced killer theory. If this theory were true, then Brian Shaffer would be the smiley-faced killer's only victim whose body has not yet been found. On an interesting side note, the smiley-face murder theory is a theory advanced by retired New York City detectives Kevin Gannon and Anthony Duarte, as well as Dr. Lee Gilbertson, who is a criminal justice professor and gang expert at St. Cloud State University. It alleges that 45 young men found dead in bodies of water across several Midwestern American states from the late 1990s to the 2010s did not accidentally drown, as concluded by law enforcement agencies, but were victims of either one or multiple serial killers. The term smiley face became connected to the alleged murders when it was made public that the police had discovered graffiti depicting a smiley face near locations where they think the killer dumped the bodies in at least a dozen of the cases. Retired New York City detective Kevin Gannon wrote a textbook case study on the subject titled Case Studies in Drowning Forensics. The response to the smiley-face killings theory by law enforcement investigators and other experts has been largely sceptical. The Columbus police eventually rejected any connection to the alleged smiley-face killer in Brian Shaffer's case, following the lead of most law enforcement agencies, including the FBI. After this second short break, in part 3, the final part of this podcast, we will look at other developments into Brian Shaffer's disappearance and the legacy it has left.
Fright Nights was established in 1999 as the first company in the world to offer overnight ghost hunt experiences to the general public, pioneering paranormal events since the last century. Fright Nights operate at hundreds of the UK's most haunted and exclusive venues. All events have their own team of experienced paranormal investigators, mediums and psychics. They have a VIP members club for regular returning guests, offering loyalty discounts and exclusive invitation-only events. They can also host private events for your family and friends. You can contact them on 07852 998 628 or email them at office@frightnights.co.uk. or take a look at their website at www.frightnights.co.uk, where you can see the many locations they investigate and learn about them and the opportunities they have available. Hundreds of ghost hunters join Fright Nights every month for the most thrilling ghost hunting experiences they'll never forget. If you haven't been on a ghost hunt before, then why not join them to see what it's all about? Why not visit their social media sites for up-to-date information on all the places they visit and to see what's coming up in the future? They look forward to seeing you all soon. Fright Nights Ghost Hunting Events. Remember, Only the original will do.
In the September of 2008, during a heavy windstorm, Randy Shaffer, Brian Shaffer's brother, was at his father, I do apologise, was at his Baltimore home in Ohio yard, clearing some debris, when a branch blew off from a nearby tree and struck him fatally. Neighbours found his body the following day and immediately called the police. Shortly after Randy Shaffer's death, Neil Rosenberg, who was an attorney for Brian Shaffer's friend William Florence, wrote to the private investigator Don Corvey, who had volunteered his time to help the Shaffer family find Brian. The attorney wrote to the PI regarding his client's, William Florence, ongoing refusal to take a polygraph test. Neil Rosenberg communicated that he had learned that the Columbus police, who were investigating the case, believed that Brian Shaffer was still alive. He said, and I quote, "If Brian is alive, which is what I'm led to believe, after speaking with the detective involved, that it is Brian Shaffer and not William Florence who is causing his family pain and hardship." Neil Rosenberg also wrote, and I quote, "Brian should come forward and end this." He also claimed that William Florence had nothing to hide and that he had merely told everything he knew from the beginning and did not see the value of going through it again. Neil Rosenberg claimed that many of those who were remarkably close to Brian Shaffer have criticised William Florence for not being forthcoming enough and taken the polygraph test. Derek Shaffer, who was Brian Shaffer's younger brother, recalled, and I quote, "As soon as the detective started getting involved, that's when he pretty much had no contact with anybody." He continued, and again I quote, "I've always thought he definitely knows something, he just won't come forward with it." Derek Shaffer believes it is possible that his brother, Brian Shaffer, is still alive and that William Florence knows where he might have gone. Derek Shaffer continues, again, and I quote, "If Brian did take off somewhere, if that is the case, we just always had a strong feeling that Clint, meaning William Florence, would possibly know that. Sorry about that. Brian Shaffer's girlfriend, Alexis Wagoner, also thinks that William Florence is withholding information, but she also believes that it is likely her former boyfriend is dead and did not run off. She says, and I quote,
"I can't imagine he would have just done that."
In 2014, 8 years after Brian Shaffer's disappearance, the Columbus police said that they were still receiving at least 2 tips a month on the case via the local Crime Stoppers hotline, though none had proven even remotely useful. On an interesting side note, Crime Stoppers hotline is a community program that assists people in providing anonymous information about criminal activity. Often managed by non-profit groups or the police themselves, it operates separately from the emergency telephone number system or other standard methods of contacting the police. This allows a person to provide a crime-solving assistance to the authorities without being directly involved in the investigation process itself. It was founded in the United States in 1976 in Albuquerque, New Mexico. Crime Stoppers later caught on in Australia, Canada, Ireland, and the United Kingdom. The authorities, especially the police, occasionally rely on information from the community about criminal activities or events. Crime Stoppers was developed to enable the public to participate without fear of reprisal and to make it easier for witnesses to volunteer information anonymously, although there have been challenges to this aspect. One of the original investigators of the Brian Shaffer's case, a man named Andre Edwards, told the magazine Columbus Monthly that the evidence in this case filled 4 boxes of files, and that after an extensive review of the camera footage at the Ugly Tuna Saloon from the night Brian Shaffer disappeared, which was intended to rule out the idea that he could have left in disguise, the investigators said that he could, and I quote, "said with 100% certainty that Shaffer did not leave via the escalator." The Columbus police say they have 3 working theories about the Brian Shaffer disappearance case, but decline to discuss these theories, even generally, with the Columbus Monthly magazine. An interesting side note, the Columbus Monthly is a magazine that has been an important and influential voice in central Ohio. The magazine, which was created in June 1975, has a well-earned reputation for tweaking the local establishment, challenging the monopoly daily on breaking news, and providing a much-needed perspective and alternative voice on both political and civic issues. It is also known for its heavily researched service pieces and is a member of the City and Regional Magazine Association, or the CRMA for short. In 2019, an image of an alleged American homeless man in Tijuana, Mexico, who had a striking resemblance to Brian Shaffer, began circulating online. A Columbus news station called 10 TV then forwarded the image of the homeless man to the detective in charge of Brian Shaffer's case in 2020. The detective in charge of the case then sent the image to the FBI for facial recognition analysis, which ruled Brian Shaffer out as the identity of the homeless man. Another quick interesting side note, a facial recognition system is a technology potentially capable of matching a human face from a digital image or a video frame against a database of all faces. Such a system is typically employed to authenticate users through ID verification services and works by pinpointing and measuring facial features from a given image. And in the March of 2021, nearly 15 years after Brian Shaffer's disappearance, the Ohio Bureau of Criminal Investigation released an age-progressed photo of what Brian Shaffer might look like at the age of 42. Between the time of Brian Shaffer's disappearance and his own death, Randy Shaffer, Brian's father, joined the families of other missing adults in Ohio in lobbying the state legislature to pass a bill establishing a statewide protocol for such missing person cases. Originally, at the time when Brian Shaffer disappeared, it was left up to individual departments on how to handle such cases, and some felt that investigations into their relative disappearances had suffered as a result. However, by the time Randy Shaffer died, the bill had become law. There was one last strange thing that happened during Brian Shaffer's father's online obituary. It was decided, by the rest of the family presumably, that it would be a nice idea to have a condolence book posted online so people could leave messages and thoughts for their father. Then, later on close inspection, one of the signatures in it said, and I quote, "To Dad, love, Brian." This also suggested that Brian Shaffer might have left Columbus for a new life somewhere else. However, upon further investigation, the online note was found to have been posted from a computer accessible to the public in Franklin County. So, it was determined to be a hoax.
Thank you all for taking the time out to listen to this episode of Mark's Unexplained World. In our next episode, show number 106, we are going to be looking at the Byford Dolphin incident. The Byford Dolphin was a semi-submersible, column-stabilised drilling rig operated by Dolphin Drilling, a Fred Olsen Energy subsidiary. It drilled seasonally for various companies in the British, Danish and Norwegian sectors of the North Sea. The rig was the site of several serious incidents, most notably an explosive decompression in 1983 that killed 4 divers and 1 dive tender, as well as severely injuring another dive tender. The families of the divers eventually received compensation for the damages from the Norwegian government 26 years after the incident.
This show was written and researched by myself, Mark Hughes, and proofread and edited by Linda Hughes. As usual, the pronunciations of the names and places was all mine. The actors in this episode were Mark Hughes, Linda Hughes, Denise Poolar, and Tilly Treadwell from the Weird Walk Home podcast. With special thanks to Neil Packer and the staff at the Haunted Antiques Paranormal Research Centre in Hinckley, and a big thank you to everyone for listening. We never run out of ideas here at the office for Mark's Unexplained World podcast, but if you know or have any other intriguing stories under the Unexplained banner, including ufology, hauntings, disasters, and any other sort of paranormal phenomena, including true crime, unsolved crime, and missing people, just drop me a direct message and I will see what I can do. I will also include the name of the person who suggested the idea in the end credits of the podcast. And again, just to add, if you are listening to this show on YouTube, please give us a review and a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel. And if you are listening on any other podcast platforms, again, give us a like and a follow. A thank you in advance. Mark's Unexplained World, because there's more to the paranormal than meets the third eye. And remember guys, keep it real, because being real is better than being perfect. This show and all its contents are covered by basic copyright of Mark the Medium.